and we are back again with another episode of We Got That Smoke with none other than Dr. Amos Wilson.
Intelligence must be defined in terms of the degree to which it solves your problem. The nature of education today prepares you to solve their problems, not your own. That's why you study their books, you go to their schools, you learn their information, their language, their styles, their perceptions, so that when you come out, you can do a humdinger of a job solving European problems, but you can't solve your own. And then you dare call yourself intelligent. Come on. That's the height of stupidity. That's not intelligence at all. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, under oppression, the oppressed people must be turned backwards. They must see lies as truth and truth as lies. You see? They must see intelligence as stupidity as intelligence. And I don't have time to go with it tonight, but I can show you where almost every idea we get is twisted around, backwards. And it's got to be if the system is to operate. And this is another thing that I talk about when I talk about the education of our children. Ultimately, the education of our children must be an education for solving the problems of black people. And those problems are not the same as those of white folk. Let me sum it up this way. I don't have time to talk about it in detail. I often say then that the destiny of the white child, by the very nature of the racial status quo today, is conservative. And the destiny of the black child, based on the same racial status quo, by its very nature, must be what? Revolutionary. It's got to be. In other words, the whites who have all of the money and have all of the power, military advantage, economic advantage, social advantage, cultural advantage, all of the other advantages we talk about, they must be educated to maintain and advance those advantages. Therefore, their education is what? Fundamentally to hold on to what they got. You understand? That's why you can't give your children the same education as white children. They're not in the same place. What are they conserving? Their deprivation? Yeah. And in a sense, we are being educated to conserve our deprivation and to perpetuate our oppression. When you go around this world and you tell me every African nation that you visit, whether it is in the Caribbean, Central or South America, or on the African continent itself, you see African people at the bottom of social, economic, and other ladders. Even in their own countries, other groups are stacked on top of them, one right after the other. The same thing that Marcus Garvey saw when he moved around the world. How can you say your children must have the same education as a white child? When you tell me that the wealth of the world is located on the African continent and located in the lands of non-whites, when you tell me that Japan, which has no natural resources at all, and yet is seen as one of the richest and most powerful nations on earth, that you want your children to have the same education, you have to be out of your minds. In order for us to be in this condition, where Africans starve over wealth, it means then that our minds must have been turned backwards. It means that the European is keeping us in a particular kind of consciousness, such that we cannot use our own wealth and our own resources to feed our own children. If then we are to take advantage of our own wealth and of our own possibilities, we must be educated to get that wealth and those possibilities back. And that means what? Revolution. It means turning this world upside down. See, some of you sit here and you innocently talk about, I want to be equal. That's all I want. I want to be equal. Do you know what? That's a revolutionary statement, you know that. A lot of people don't recognize that. They think they're non-revolutionary, you know. They think revolutionaries are people who want to shoot and fight. And so now we just wanted everybody to be the same. Do you know what you're saying? Do you know the tremendous amount of transference of wealth that must take place for black folk to be equal with white folk? Yeah. The tremendous control over resources, the tremendous ownership of real estate in this country, the real ownership of the means of production. Are you really talking about equality? You can't be. And so if you start to realize what you're saying when you say that you just want to be equal and you want all people to be the same, you realize that you are a revolutionary and you're making a revolutionary statement. Because for black people to be equal in this country will call for a major reconstruction and a major reorganization of this nation. You have to understand that. You know, in New York, they're asking blacks who are fighting the Jews in Crown Heights, how are we going to reduce racial tension? You know, and they keep pushing them, and I wish they would ask me that. I'm not here to reduce racial tension. I'm here to increase it. I bring not peace, but what? A sword. Because in a city, as cities all across this country, where blacks don't even own their own communities, where they only spend a nickel out of every dollar they have with themselves, there cannot be racial peace and harmony until that's changed around. And there's going to be some racial turmoil while we change it around. It's got to be. We got to get ready for another 10 or 15 or 20 years of racial tension. Because it's going to take that for us to gain, if you want to call it, equality in the system. You know, you have some groups, when we were picketing stores and so forth, after they had insulted some of our women, as you're familiar with out here, well, why don't you get your own stores? And you have to remind them, but you really don't mean that. You're just trying to put me down. Because if I own my own store, how would you make a living? So in a sense, you're going to object just as much to me owning my own as you're objecting to me now picketing yours. Because in the long run, your wealth depends on mine not owning something. And therefore, when I start owning, you're going to have another reason to fight me. So let's get used to tension. You're going to catch hell one way or the other. So you may as well catch it in the right way. This is why I talk to black psychologists who get into these useless arguments with Europeans about the cultural bias of intelligence tests. As you must understand, it's not about cultural bias. It's not about the test at all. It's about power and the rationalization of oppression and control. As soon as you prove to them that you are as smart or smarter than they are still going to do what? Kill you. Of course. This is the way people act in real life. You get rid of your what? Your rivals. So the issue is not, right now they say we're keeping you down because you're too dumb, right? But then when you go the other way, we got to get rid of you because you threaten our way of life and our economy. So you may as well get intelligent and get ready and get the battle on, because either way, you know, this is what it's about. We have to understand this. And we are so productive as a people. I tell you, people are marveling about Say a person like Mike Tyson, 30 million. I hope he manages to get some of that 30 million. See, everybody else is getting on the bandwagon. It looks like it's going to be payday for a whole lot of people. But anyway, that aside, and we get caught up with that, and yet we don't realize, and I try to get our people to recognize, that don't look so much at what he's going to earn, look at what he's creating. If he's getting 30, he's creating 300 million. Where is that money going? If Michael Jordan is getting so many millions, if he's getting 10 or 15, he must be creating 150 million. Why aren't we getting that end of the deal? Black music sells more music than any other music in the world. Millions and millions and billions of dollars. But where do we get off looking at just the movie star? The star is only getting a fraction of what they produce. When you look around, then you will see that black people have been the most productive and the most wealth-producing people this nation has ever seen. And yet that wealth is not coming to us. When you get into a true Afrocentric education, you see, you will educate your children to get that wealth. You understand? And that's how you get them off welfare and all that. And this is how you stop them from shooting us in the street and knocking each other out and all these things, you see. But they must be appropriately educated. But you must understand what intelligence is, how it is built, what the real purpose of education is about, and how it must be given to our children. And it's at this point, you see, of our not meeting the intent of the biological programs of our children with the content of our culture and the content of education that they are lost. And it is this thing then that we must change. These children then, to use Pearson's word, we either block the child's movement into the unknown and so block intellectual growth, or we propel the child into inappropriate experience. And this is how intelligence is killed. You don't appropriately set it up. In the new publication, I talk about continuity. And I mentioned it even here in the developmental psychology of the black child, about how there's a discontinuity that the black child faces when it moves into school. Because these schools are not organically related to the culture of our people. There's no bridge that moves between the black home and the school. The child enters into a completely new world, speaking a different language, with different expectations, different behavioral orientations, different time systems. All kinds of things are going on in there. That is quite different from the movement of the child from its home. Remember, its parents are also the teachers. The language that it is speaking in the house is also the language that's being spoken in the school. And yet we have a situation here of where we expect our children to shed the so-called black English as soon as they walk through the door of the school, to unlearn the values of black culture and so forth as soon as they walk through the door. We expect them to go through the process of unlearning their culture and repressing their culture and learning the new culture at the same time, at the same point as a white child. And therefore, when we give them a test and they don't make the same scores, we start talking about deficiencies, special education, and all the rest of that nonsense that you hear all the time. That comes from people not studying the history, knowing themselves. Who told you that all children must learn the same thing at the same time? At the same age? That's not written in concrete. If you have a different destiny, which I mentioned earlier, if our children are to solve different problems, they must be learning different things at the same age. So consequently, the use of standardized tests and these other tests they're irrelevant, because we are not concerned that they have the same knowledge as white children, because they're not going in the same direction as white children. We will be teaching them in terms of what we have to do as a people. And therefore, so-called standardized tests do not apply, particularly those where you then start measuring deficiencies and all this other nonsense. I try to get across to people the understanding that each culture has a time dimension related to it. Each culture has its own time, you know. Black folks' time is real. African time is real. And there's nothing wrong with it, by the way. Nothing wrong with it. It's problematic because we are operating within the time structures of what? Of another people. But if we had fully our own culture in place, the time would be on time. You see, it only becomes a problem because you have two time systems that are clashing one with the other. And these time systems are related again to a people's history and experience, you see, and to a people's needs and desires and outlook on life. The time is not something that just is abstract and represented by a clock. No. How your time is represented comes out of your own cultural experience. Now, what do I mean then by this? Here you put your children in these schools and you say, well, the European child is in there 45 minutes. And therefore, I want my child to have equal education. I'll educate him for 45 minutes. And then you'll complain to me about, well, they come from the project, they come from single mother homes, suffer from steam, you know, and all of this. But yet, with all of these problems, he's got to learn the same thing in as much as a European child in the same what? The same, that's what you're saying? You see? If children these kind of problems, then the time structure of their education is fit of those problems. Since these are not white children's time, and it is the use of the time systems in these schools based on white culture that in a sense, that is why when you really come to understand education in its deepest sense eyes, in order to them that time, when you restructure this, right? When you get deep enough. Because the way you're organizing in a circle also reflects your cultural experience and needs, ladies and gentlemen. You give that their needs, their intellect is going to explode and grow. In this day and age, black people must know more. We must know what they know and even know. So then we have to understand that our children have been given great gifts. We've been blessed as a people with such wonderful talent in our children. Our problem then becomes one of investing in these talents. No doubt we have some good church people here. And you'll recall, I think it's Matthew 14:25 or something. The first journey leaves the servants with so many talents or money and returns to see how they invested that money. And so you had one, he got so much and he invested it and it doubled or whatever, and the master rewarded him for that. And another invested a certain amount of it, and then you had one who had all kinds of excuses. Oh, you reap where you didn't sow, and you're such a terrible master, and you this and you that, and so I just hid my talent buried it in the ground. Here it is. What happened? Even the talent he had was what? Taken and given to those who had more. As a matter of fact, the verse says, to he who has what? More shall be given. That's right. And he who is not, even that which he has shall be what? Taken from him. You have been given beautiful and wonderful children. The problem becomes then, how much are you willing to invest in this great talent that you've been given? If you don't invest in this talent, and if you don't invest correctly, your children and their minds will be taken away from us and used to enrich another people who already have more than they know what to do with. And even the little we have shall be taken from us. And as the servant, as happened to the servant, we shall be thrown outside with a gnashing of teeth, wailing and moaning. We've been given these children. And this is what's going on, ladies and gentlemen. Our lack of investment in them means that they come to haunt us in these streets out here. We come to fear them. It means even those who get a so-called education, get that education to increase the wealth of the other people, not of ourselves. That's what happens when investment is incorrect, or when we don't invest at all. Their lives are taken from us. While I'm on this thing here, there are some of us, we've been made in these churches to believe that we don't have to do anything but depend and wait on the Lord. Yes, and God will provide. But God has already provided by giving you children with such beautiful minds and bodies. You've already been blessed. God is not wasting talent and time. He did not give these children the kind of brains that I just got through talking about for them not to use them. It is a blasphemy for them to grow up and not use their brains and minds. And yet we have some people who think all they got to do is sit back and wait on the Lord. Reread your Bible. I said people don't read Bible very well, you know. And I don't have time to talk about it today. But I wish I could cover the whole story of Moses, which is such a beautiful example of political science. Fantastic example of political science. And often it becomes a little fun to ask church members, how many of you realize that the children of Israel were not really converted to God, even after all those miracles? Yeah. And yet it's right there in front of your face. They still weren't into God at all. Moses had to go up to get what? Laws and rules to come back down to unify them, which meant that they didn't have all the laws and rules when they came out, did they? No, not at all. And then when he got back, they were down there partying, worshiping other gods. After all of these Passover miracles and splitting the Red Sea and everything else, they're still praising another God. All right? Some people talk about these people being chosen. And I said they were chosen because they were so hard-headed. And so God figured, if I can convince this group, the rest is easy. Yeah, you know, because people are chosen by God don't mean that they're necessarily the better people. You know, we confuse that, you know. We got a lot of people confuse this issue. Well, they are God's chosen. It could be chosen like a bully is chosen in the class. This is the baddest one, so let me get this one. I straighten this one out, the rest of the class is okay. You know, so to be chosen doesn't necessarily mean that you're better. It could mean that you're the worst of the lot. Yes. And when you read their history, you will see them in constant rebellion against God. Constant rebellion. They nearly hung Moses about 4 or 5 times. That's right. But see, people don't read. You see, they don't really read. They don't read what's right in front of them. Not at all. Moses was saved within an inch of his life. Many times. Yes. I ask people, how many of you realize that Moses killed 3,000 people, ordered the death of 3,000? Why did he order the death of 3,000 people? Read it and see. There was also an ordering of the killing of 24,000 people. Remember that one? The Midianite story? What is the political science reason for that which went on there? It teaches whole lessons about unity and unity of purpose, and how when a nation is surrounded by its enemies, when it is caught in a wilderness, it cannot afford a great deal of dissension and splits within itself. Good morning. The major thing I'm trying to get to here is, of course, the issue of the promised land. And I get it to these people who are going to wait on Jesus, you see, and when they read their Bible, God promised these people this land, didn't he? Didn't he promise it to them? Yeah, he promised it to them. But there was something interesting about that promise. When they got there, he didn't say, step right up, step right in. You know? No, he didn't, did he? Oh, you've arrived. Go in and enjoy yourself. He came to Moses and said, Moses, you've got to send in an intelligence team into this land that I have promised you. And that team has to do surveillance. It has to get the lay of the land, the lay of the cities, count their armies, count what they eat, even bring back some samples of how they eat and so forth and so on. Isn't that what he did? Why? This all-knowing, all-seeing God could have just handed Moses all the information, couldn't he? But he didn't do it, did he? Even though he had promised them the land, he still didn't say, here, Moses, this is the way it is. Or better yet, he didn't take his lightning rod and just kill all the people over there and say, okay, go ahead on in. Because he told Moses would have to, did Moses have to do to get that land? They had to what? Fight. They had to go to war. They had to go to war to get a land promised them by God. That's right. You must understand what that is. God promises in this, and you got to fight for it. And they went over there and got psyched out. All of them, that was Aaron and two of them. There are giants in the land. We can't beat them. They're so big. They're so tall. Whoa, you know. And boy, the Israelites were having fits that night. That was another night they nearly hung Moses, by the way. He was within an inch of his life. You know, they almost took him out tonight. You brought us all this way to make us starve. We were doing better than Edom. Take us back. They got so raising so much hell. God even got mad with him. So let me get to him. I'm in the second night. He said, no. He negotiated with God. Hold on now. You know, what do it look like? You know, you promised these people this thing. You done brought them all this way now and you killed them. Read it. You don't have to believe me. Read it. A very human negotiation went on between the two. But what did I to say? Because my time is running. That they had to fight for even that which was promised them. And the problem was, even though it was promised to them, they were still spooked by the people. They were to fight. And what happened after that? They were then sentenced to remain in the wilderness for another, 40 years or whatever. So that scared, cowardly group would what? Die out. And only those who had faith that they could defeat the other people would inherit the land. And only those two that said, we can win. We can fight them. We can win, man. If we just go ahead and fight. They saw the land. And this reminds me again very much, you know, of our situation here today. We have a land promised to us, ladies and gentlemen. But we got to fight for it. We got to struggle for it. Our children have been well armed with intelligence and creativity, beautiful bodies and minds and so forth. But they must be armed to win the land promised to us. It's not going to be handed to us. But if we permit them to be psyched out, as they were psyched out at this point, then we will be lost in the wilderness for another generation or two. To a good extent, our young men, our people who are rolling in these and in these back alleys with crack and heroin and the other kinds of things, are those people who have been psyched out by the white man, who have come to accept the white man as supreme and invincible, who have come to accept the belief that they do not contain within themselves the talents and the abilities to transform this world and to change its very nature and make it a home for themselves. And therefore they have given up. And in their agony and in their fear, they try to still their pain and their cowardice and their emasculation with drugs and other forms of narcotics and psychological rationalizations. And many then commit suicide, and many hurt and damage each other. The white man is but a man. He bleeds like any other man. His mind and his brain is no greater than any other man, and he can be defeated. And we have the will and the power to do so. But until we exercise that will, we will remain in the wilderness, and we shall suffer and die in that wilderness. And I'll just wrap it up here. There's so many things. But sometimes then what we have here, what I'm saying here then, is our children and that magnificent mind that they've been given is destroyed by a system of racism. And it's very important that we understand what racism is and what white supremacy is. Many people think, you see, that racism means attitudes, that people hate you. Racism has very little ultimately to do with hate, or negative attitudes, or stereotypes. See, a lot of us think that once we really convince these Europeans that we are Egyptians, they really learn of our great and glorious history, they're going to step back and give us some of their money. You got another thought coming. Oh yeah, you Egyptian, you're right. But you still ain't getting none of this money. Oh yeah, you wrote first and you did this first, but we're still holding on to this bread. We're still holding on to this power because we are addicted to it. We believe it belongs to us, you see. So in the end, after you reveal all of this knowledge to them, there is no automatic shift in power relations. The battle we are fighting, ladies and gentlemen, is not so much a battle of truth and lies, but it is a struggle for power. You have to face that. That's a reality. You could see in the magazine here last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever, Newsweek, was Cleopatra black? And they even made some concessions. But they're only making concessions to maintain the system. There's not going to be any fundamental change. None whatsoever. Because ultimately, you see, racism, as defined by Wellman in his book, racism can be seen to systematically provide economic, political, psychological, and social advantage for whites at the expense of blacks and other people of color. The determining factor of race relations is not prejudice. It's not really stereotypes. That's just to support it and rationalize it, you see, toward blacks, but rather the superior position of whites and institutions, ideological as well as structural, which maintain it. Racism is more effectively analyzed as a strategy for the maintenance of privilege than as prejudice. You see, even if I know you're the great sons and daughters of Egypt, I still like this money I got in my pocket. And I still don't plan to turn it loose to you. And that's what I've been struggling all along. My denying to you that you were was still a part of that struggle to maintain my wealth and advantage. Now that you forced this truth on me, I'm going to use another reason to maintain my wealth and my advantage. So the ball game goes on. If we view racism as a culturally sanctioned, rational response to struggles over scarce resources, and this is the thing you got to understand here, that's at the base of this thing. A struggle over what? Resources. That there are not enough resources for everybody to enjoy them equally well, particularly when some people want to live high off the hog. See, when I talk about the black male, I try to get get this understood, that the male is designed for struggle and war. Yes. And I know some of you feminists don't want to deal with it, but it's set up that way. I try to get people to understand that the definition of what it means to be a man is a social definition. There is a difference between being a male and a man. Yes. That is why male boys must be trained to be men. Men are created and trained to be. We must understand that. You also must understand that the word man is a nurturing term. Yes, a man is a nurturer of his people. He does not have babies, but he still nurtures his culture by protecting those babies, by protecting the family, and by protecting the culture. That is his sustenance. This is how he nurtures, you see. That is why what it means to be a man must be defined by the group, you see. So that a man, in defending his manhood, defends his family and defends his people. That's why the definition is what? A social one. When you study the history of African people, then, you will see that a boy became a man when he showed and demonstrated his ability to feed his people and to do what was necessary to gain resources to maintain the life and survival of his people. That is why when he was sent out to make a kill, this is not a symbolic thing. And after he made that kill, he would bring the larger portion of that kill back and lay it before his mother to indicate to her, just as you fed me when I was a boy and nurtured me, now I have arrived at the point where I am to feed you. In other words, the ultimate definition of manhood is inextricably related to the concept of producer. A boy moves into manhood when he moves out of the position of consumer into the position of producer. You must understand that. And he is not given title of a man until he proves that he is a producer and not a consumer. Under European oppression, we have permitted the black man to define himself in terms of his consumption and not in terms of his production. And therefore he will kill another black man for a pair of sneakers and for junk and garbage. And we see him selling poison and death to our children so that he can buy and consume and not produce and protect his people. As a matter of fact, he becomes a menace to the very life of his own people. And what do we mean here then? We mean then, if the word man, which is a social definition, is not defined correctly, then your males become anti-social. That is why we must go in the process now of redefining under these conditions what it means to be a man. And that is why a large part of Afrocentric education is involved in the training of men. Because there comes a time when men must struggle with other men to feed their families. There comes a time, because resources are scarce, that men must be prepared to go to battle with other men to feed their people. That's what it's about. European man came over here. It was not a result of his organizational ability that built this great nation. It was the result of the fact that he attacked and destroyed other men and established himself on top of those people and laid a foundation for his people and built himself an army so that he could protect his people and feed his children and dare other men to challenge him. In African societies, where the society depends on cattle, and often that cattle has to be rustled, Now, you can get into a moral deal with this if you want to. The boy was not seen as a man until he rustled his first cattle. And that meant that he had to go through guile and courage and strength enough to take the cattle from someone else to protect his people. That's what it's about. And therefore, black men must come to realize that if the black race is to survive, and if it involves then our struggling with the white race or any other race, they must be prepared to undertake that struggle and win. And those who have not decided on that path then must die the death of cowards and must join their enemies in the killing of themselves and the destroying of their own people. And this is what we are facing here today, ladies and gentlemen.